So if it's your first time, we will give you some housekeeping rules on how to engage in a minute. And before we get started, I just want to make sure that we have everyone ready on our side in terms of all the panelists.
Mitsuki, if there are no objections, I might already start recording the session.
Okay, so we will be recording the session and it's also going to be live streamed. So if there are no objections, we would like to get started with that, the recording. I don't see any in the chat room, so thank you for starting the recording. Okay, good. So welcome everyone to this fifth series or fifth session of the African Internet Resilience webinar series. And this particular session will focus on creating a deeper understanding of community networks and the potential that they have to bring change and address the issue of lack of access to rural and underserved communities, and how we can actually create an enabling environment that basically is needed for this type of complementary access to exist or to flourish. So the theme or the title of this webinar is Complementary Access Networks. Now, we have a couple of objectives for this particular session, and thank you for sharing, support team. We have a couple of objectives that we would like to achieve for this webinar. The first one, if you could just go back one slide, sorry. Yes, so we would like to just take you through an introduction of what are the complementary access models that exist with a focus on community networks, and what are the opportunities they present to bridge the digital divide in the continent. Then we are going to explore some of them, the models that are already in existence, community networks, how they've been made sustainable. We have a great lineup on that respect. And then we're also going to discuss the policies and regulations that enable these complementary models to exist. So if you could go to the next slide, we've lined up a great set of panelists and speakers for you this afternoon. Where I am, it's afternoon. For some, it might be morning or evening. And we're using 1100 UTC as our starting time. So, and from the panelists, we have quite a good set of panelists or speakers for you. Could go to the next slide, please. So to start us off will be Moctar Yedaly from the African Union. Then we will go into the panel discussions. We have Mr. Jason Aproskie from the Competition Commission of South Africa. We have Ms. Josephine Miliza from LockNet. We have Ms. Chako Armand from La Défense. We have Ms. Susan Wegoye from the Ugandan Communications Commission. And we have Mr. Victor Sante from GIFEC in Ghana. So that's our agenda for today. And leading us next on, before we get started and before I introduce Moctar, I just wanted to have something to sort of get us started. If you could click on to the next slide. With respect to how to engage. So basically, we have a couple of ways that you can engage. The first one is that, please note, we have interpretation available in English and French. I think from the bottom of your Zoom window or webinar window, you should have the option to select English or French if you've not done so, and you can disable the language from the main room. We have chat functions. The chat will enable you to chat with everyone else or other attendees at the webinar. And then we do have a Q&A room. So we'll request that you post your questions in the Q&A room. That's where we will be corralling all the questions that will be posted for answering during the Q&A session. For those of you who are also engaging with social media and tweeting about or posting on Facebook and other channels, the hashtag is Africa Internet Resilience, and that's what we'll use to promote the event. So thank you very much for doing that. And as mentioned earlier, we will be recording this session, and it's also a live stream for those of us who are not able to attend. So to get us started, I just want to give one or two personal views around these issues of complementary access, and then invite Moctar to talk to us about his perspective from the AU. So one of the things that I draw inspiration from when I think about complementary access is something that has been in place in most of Africa where we live, and especially where I live now, I'm beginning to appreciate it even more, which is providing water. So in many places in our continent, water is provided through community solutions because existing solutions are not able to provide water to the masses. So where I live, we have a community-driven project that is able to provide us tapped water a couple of times a week. It's reliable, we can depend on it. And I draw inspiration from it because it's the community that came together, organized itself, was able to drill a borehole and implement the piping system and so on, that each one of us in this area that we live in is able to access. And I'm sure that's a story that most of those who come from the African region can relate to. And so when I think about it from the context of complementary access solutions, I tend to think from that perspective that if communities are empowered or enabled, will they be able to provide access solutions to the people that lives within their regions or communities in a more sustainable way, like they've done with water. So to get us started, I would like to invite Moctar Yedaly. Moctar is the head of the Information Society at the African Union Commission. He has an MBA and 2 engineering degrees in radio communications, computers, and telecoms. And we've come to know him as Mr. ICT at the AU because of the many things that he's done to advance connectivity, internet development in the region. And he's the father of the Malabo Convention and the setup of the .Africa domain name. Welcome, Moctar. Moctar, you're still muted. Maybe you need to mute.
Okay, sorry. I'm on now. Do you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Michuki, and thank you for the good introduction. And I will not make it very long. I would like to seize the opportunity to welcome everybody to this 5th webinars and to mention just a few things that are very important to the context on which we have actually created this series of webinars. As you certainly are aware of, the COVID-19 has really just confirmed the power of the ICTs, and we need ICTs more than ever for monitoring the progress of the pandemic, for keeping in touch with our loved ones, for learning and working from home, and conducting our personal and general transactions, be it economic transaction or any other type of transaction. So access to ICT has become now, and access to internet has become now something that is of vital importance, not only, but also of a survival necessity today. Despite all the effort that has been done so far by all stakeholders to provide to everybody universal access, as you mentioned it in comparing with how to provide water and so on, access to broadband and to ICTs is far from really being achieved in the African countries. Hence, we cannot keep on doing business as usual. Einstein has defined the madness if somebody is using the same way all the time, doing the same thing and expecting different results, is a madman or a mad woman or a mad person. So therefore, it is very important that we go back to some alternatives, connectivity, as you mentioned, 3D, some complementary access, and more specifically to the community-owned networks. These webinars, the fifth one, comes after the first one we have done on resilience, the second one on spectrum, the third one on cybersecurity, the fourth one on measurement, and this one on complementary access. And it has been organized all the time by AU and Internet Society, with African Telecommunication Union, with some other major partners. This time it is with APC, and we hope that, as you mentioned, the objectives to really address the matter on how what is really the complementary access, and what are the complementary solutions for access, and what is the role of policymakers and regulators. The AU Specialized Technical Committee, which is the Conference of Ministers in charge of ICT, held last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, has requested us as African Union Commission to come up with the framework and solutions related to the community access. I know it is really for certain people, it is a shift in culture, shift in approach to the providing access. But this is why, without anticipating to our discussion, we need to discuss all that. And I'm pretty confident that the panelists we do have and the contribution from the floor, questions and so on, will help the AUC really to develop the framework, the continental framework, and the regulation with regard to the community networks or community operated networks in general. With that, I will thank you very much, and wish you a fruitful discussion. I'm still here if there is any questions to be added to this. Thank you very much, and over to you, Michoki.
Thank you, Moctar. I like that approach, that we cannot continue doing the same thing and expecting the same results. That's certainly something we need to think about more critically as we go forward. What are the other approaches that we can take? Thank you. As I go into the panel session discussion, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have closed captioning available on this webinar session. So please check at the bottom of your screen. You will see the option for closed captioning, and you can enable that for you to be able to follow the conversations as well. Now, moving on, our first panelist for today is Mr. Jason Aproskie. He is an experienced economist with expertise in competition and regulatory economics, and experience across a variety of countries, sectors, and companies. Currently, he is the principal economist at the Competition Commission of South Africa, where he recently led the Competition Commission's market inquiry into the high cost of data in South Africa, which was concluded in December 2019. I think most of you may remember the hashtag data must fall that happened in South Africa. So I'm hoping that he will be able to share the findings and the recommendations from this data inquiry and what we can learn from it. Thank you and welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Michoki. Hopefully we have achieved that, and data has fallen to some extent, and I'll talk to that briefly. So as has been stated, the Competition Commission of South Africa engaged or commissioned a market inquiry into the high cost of data services in South Africa. South Africa is particularly high in this regard with regards to data. And what's happened since we've concluded that inquiry is that we've concluded some landmark agreements with operators for a number of commitments. And one of those commitments across the large or more dominant operators is for the reduction of data prices. And so what we've seen since then is that poorer consumers in South Africa have seen reductions in data prices, particularly prepaid data, of around 30% or even more in some cases, which is a great victory for the Commission and for consumers in South Africa. But maybe focusing more on today's topic, I think we still have to acknowledge that this by itself is not going to achieve universally affordable access. It's going to make access more affordable, and it's going to be have a real impact on poorer consumers in South Africa and the degree to which they're included in the economy and the digital economy, but it's not going to achieve what we want, which is universally affordable access to the internet and to data services that come with it. So what the inquiry did find, and I'm sure this can be seen in other African countries as well, is that coverage in South Africa is almost universal. 3G coverage is almost 100% of the population. 4G coverage, I would expect today, is probably over 90% at the moment, and we've seen 5G also introduced recently. But when you look at the data, only 50% to 60%, depending on what measure you use, of the population are actually accessing the internet, accessing broadband services. And in terms of fixed line, that's in terms of mobile. In terms of fixed line access, as with the other countries, coverage and access is even less, even though we have seen some growth in wealthier areas in the last few years. But what this shows, and what the research shows, and I think it's probably applicable to most, if not all, African countries, is that universal access itself is not universally affordable access. And a business as usual approach, which has already been mentioned, is not going to close this gap. And where the inquiry came out, and unfortunately I can't cover everything the inquiry did or looked at or concluded, but on this aspect where the inquiry came out is really to, well, one of our key findings was really that we need more than just business as usual. These complementary access models or alternative approaches are necessary and need to be encouraged and need to be grown. And what we found in South Africa is there are a number of complementary access models or alternative models for broadband access, and these start from the top, more commercial models, but alternative. So we have a few models that have been developed in South Africa to access poorer consumers in terms of fiber to the home, but where the model has changed to decrease cost. And this is still led by private players for profit, but focusing on a poorer consumer base or a more of a middle class consumer base. Then we also see in South Africa there have been a number of public Wi-Fi networks, which would be funded by local government. But there are also some bodies looking at introducing Wi-Fi networks in poorer areas, but monetizing that. And we know there's lots of challenges there, but there is some progress potentially. And we also see other models for more, I suppose those models, so public Wi-Fi or monetizing Wi-Fi networks, those really work in more urban areas, more densely populated areas. And obviously you do find more poorer communities that are densely populated and more urban, and therefore those kind of models can work there. We've also seen where you get maybe more sparsely populated areas, more rural areas, like a farmer, wealthier customers. There are commercial services that can connect them that are more point-to-point wireless access type providers. But what we have seen in South Africa, and there are examples, and we've seen the importance of these examples, are the community networks that we're really going to focus on today and what this session is about. And one of the key findings of the inquiry in South Africa is that these community networks are important. They serve an important role, and it's something that has to be grown. I think either Machuki or Moctar stated that used the word empowered, which is a great word, that we need to empower these community networks because of the role that they play, and often the fact that they do provide more affordable access than your typical large operator or national operator who's not focused on that kind of customer. So maybe moving into it, so I think the rest of the panelists will probably deal with this in better detail than me and help us understand this better and where we need to improve. But we did make 3 recommendations here as the Competition Commission that had to be taken forward from our inquiry around growing these community access models and providing them with the environment to grow and for more of them to be established. So the first thing we recommended is that it needs to be championed by one government department. These kind of models do need some assistance, whether it's regulatory or government assistance in most cases, not every case. And so we've recommended that one government department be allocated this, because currently in South Africa it's been perhaps divided between 2 departments. And I think the important finding that we had, which flows into one of our recommendations, is that these models do need some expertise, often some external expertise to initiate them and to sustain them. And we've seen that in the South African case, where you often have very committed and talented individuals, some of them from the APC who are on this call, but you need those kind of individuals who come in there with both the talent and the expertise, but also the commitment to start something despite the challenges that they're going to face. And so one of our key recommendations is, in terms of this government department that focuses on this aspect, is to establish a committee or a body of experts who are able to give of their time to assist in initiating these projects, to get through the regulatory burdens that they are, and to assist in maintaining. Naturally, there's going to be some external expertise that needs to be on call in these kind of projects. And I think the last recommendation, which we think is an important one, and really where regulatory change can impact these projects or these developments, is around spectrum. And what you see is these community networks, often in rural areas or underserved areas. And what you often find in these areas that are less profitable for the big operators is you've got a lot of unused spectrum, mobile spectrum. And there's a huge opportunity for the use of more high demand unused spectrum for these networks to be more efficient and to be less costly. And so what we've also recommended, and we're trying to work with our telecommunications regulator in South Africa, is that regulations need to be developed to allow for these networks to be able to access unused spectrum in their areas in order to run a less costly and more efficient network, and something which is ultimately more sustainable. And we found there's definitely a real opportunity here in South Africa. There are regulatory barriers that we've seen, which I'm sure we'll see in other markets. And it's something hopefully that we can take forward and look at ways to help these networks. And maybe lastly is that the clear opportunity there is that these community networks are typically not for profit. And therefore there really is no reason and no cost to the large operators who own the spectrum for these community networks to access this unused spectrum, which we're finding in South Africa there is a lot, particularly in rural areas where one operator is roaming on another operator's network. If there is access, there's a lot of unused spectrum. But I think that's where we've ended up with those recommendations. But I think the rest of the panelists will probably give a better sense of what these community networks are and what the barriers are across Africa.
Thank you, Jason. That was quite insightful, and those are very useful recommendations, I believe, for many countries also to look at such kind of recommendations as a way of creating that enabling environment for alternative or complementary access models to emerge. And in particular, I'm quite fascinated by the thought process that went into that, understanding that there's a need for expertise to support them to grow, designating one particular government department to support that is really useful. And of course, the issue of spectrum, which is something that we could probably have I think there was an entire session that was held before this, just looking at spectrum and better use of spectrum. So thank you very much. And now with that initial sort of introduction and background to assessing what the need for complementary access, I'd like to invite Josephine Miliza. Josephine is the regional coordinator for LockNet. I've known Josephine for some years now. She also has been running a community network in Kenya called Tunapanda, and she's very passionate working with the community networks in Africa, and also co-chairs the program committee that develops the agenda for the Summit on Community Networks in Africa, which is an annual event held every year, bringing together community networks operators in Africa. So Josephine will speak to us as we put up her slides. Will be providing us with an overview of community networks, which is one of complementary approach to providing access, and show us the landscape of community networks in Africa based on her understanding and view of them. Could we have the slides up for Josephine?
Give me a sec, I will share.
Josephine, you're up next. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chuki, for the introduction. It's an honor to join today's call webinar, and it really speaks to a topic that, as Michuki said, I'm very passionate about. And I think with COVID-19, it has really highlighted the importance of ensuring that everyone is connected. For a long time, we've been having discussions around the importance of connectivity, but this year, I think, has really cemented the notion that universal and affordable access should be available for everyone. I'd like to start by building onto the point that Michuki raised around communities coming together to solve their own challenges and solutions. As Africans, we are accustomed to the pulling together of resources for collective good or interest. So from where we come from, we see there are rotating sevens groups or credit association. Whenever there's a funeral or a wedding, we come together to pull resources. And so it's not a surprise to see how this commonality between cooperatives and the African communal value systems really enable the growth of the movement in Africa. And beyond just water, as Michuki has mentioned, beyond agriculture, now the cooperative movement and also the collective action of communities coming together is now moving into the telecommunications sector. So similar to cooperatives, similar to grassroots organizations, similar to mutual support groups, community networks are crowdsourced networks that are deployed, operated, and maintained by the community network. And these networks are initiated and started to support existing communal activities and social groups, and it's the coming together for a common vision. And so they take different models for different countries. You can see, for example, in Moctar in Zambia, where it's the evolution from community radio into an internet service provider. In Kenya, we see, for example, Tunapanda, the evolution from a digital training center to now connecting all schools. So just like to look at the context in Africa, how are the models, how are they initiated, and by who? The most common models that we see are cooperatives and nonprofits. And in the first example, we can give an example of Zenzeleni, which has evolved just from being one cooperative to now being a two-tier model that brings together local experts as well as experts from outside the community to come together and integrate the local realities to the greater telecommunication sector. As Jason rightly mentioned, is that sometimes in communities there exist gaps, and so the coming of experts from outside come in not just to deploy the network itself, but also there's a transfer of skills so that the community is able to run and operate the network even after the experts leave. But also there's the importance of having such not-for-profit organizations like Zenzeleni coming in, because you find that sometimes as grassroots organizations, there's some areas in the telecommunication sector that we find difficult to interact with. For example, as Michuki mentioned, I have been working in community networks, and being that my background is a technical background, I really didn't have a knowledge around the policy and regulation aspect. So for me, having also like other experts coming in, not just for the technical aspects of community networks, but also other aspects with regards to funding, also enable the growth of community networks. Then the second model that we see is very familiar, initiated by not-for-profit organizations or community-based organizations. And these examples, we have Bosco Uganda, Fanswam Foundation in Nigeria, Moctar works in Zimbabwe. And one thing that for me being in the movement that I'm really proud is seeing that the emergence of women-led community networks, and this is a great aspect in terms of bridging the gender digital divide. And so we see examples of community networks in Namibia, Kenya, Senegal, and Morocco that are championed by ISOC, and also Ngorongoro Community Network in Tanzania and Mamaila in South Africa. Next slide, please. When it comes to technology, I would say that 90% of community networks utilize Wi-Fi, and this is due to the fact that one, it is license exempt, equipment are readily available, and also low cost. The picture that you see is of the Zenzeleni, one of the Zenzeleni cooperatives, and in total, since inception, Zenzeleni now has up to 60 hotspots across 2 communities. And there are 2 models to this. So the first model is where the community users buy prepaid vouchers and for unlimited access throughout the month. And then the second one is where you have anchor clients who subscribe to dedicated access. And for me, this model, and from my experience, this model really is able to put in consideration the different aspects that or the different realities that community networks have, in that as a community you can come together and know who can afford more and who can you be able to subsidize the cost for. Also, just similar to other operators, community networks have also been experiencing the growth in terms of users during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Zenzeleni has shared its example, is that they increased the backhaul to 100 Mbps, and that the community network use has increased from 3 TB to 19 TB over a period of 6 months. The other issue that would be great to highlight is how do community networks access backhaul? And they utilize different technologies, as I mentioned, Wi-Fi because of affordability. There's also fiber, and TV white spaces is it has been piloted in Tanzania. Also interesting to note is how community networks are developing relationships with existing internet service providers that provide them bandwidth, in that beyond just provision of bandwidth is also a collaboration to offer technical and capacity building support for this community network, which is most of the time lacking. And a good example of this is the Kenya National Education Network, KENET, which has been a great champion for community networks in Kenya and is also now supporting Lanetu Moja Community Network and Tunapandanet. The next slide, please. Thank you. And this is my concluding slide, and just to highlight that beyond just addressing the issues around availability, as we know from studies, is that it's one thing to live near a tower, it's one thing to have access, but there are also issues around access to locally relevant content, access to locally relevant skills, access to locally relevant applications. And community networks are trying to fill this gap. I think it's a very holistic approach to digital inclusion, and we're seeing that the coming together of community networks to address these challenges collaboratively, although we are from different countries, we are from different contexts, but as it was mentioned before, some of the challenges from one African country to another are very similar. And so last year we saw a very great collaboration between Murambinda Community Network in Zimbabwe and Tunampananet in Kenya, are coming together to develop an e-learning and school management solution. And just from someone who was involved in the project, I can say that it was quite challenging, you know, working with rural schools and schools in informal settlement, trying to sell to them the idea of why they need an e-learning platform. But with COVID-19 now, it's no longer a hard sell, because it's as clear as day that these platforms are no longer a good to have, but must have. Additionally is the contribution of community networks to build socioeconomic infrastructures that do not exist in the community. As you know, Africa, one of the challenges we have is rural electrification. And being that the telecommunication sector is powered by electricity, this is actually one of the reasons, one of the barriers to universal access. And a great model that we're seeing coming from Uganda, the name of the organization is Bosco Uganda, in full battery operated systems for community outreach, is that beyond just powering the network with solar, using solar to power the network, they are also generated close to 80 kilowatt, and they're providing electricity to connected schools and centers. And this is one of the things that, one of the areas that they're able now to contribute to the pool of revenue generation. So I would just like to end by saying that I believe that we are just scratching the surface of the potential that can be realized by the community networks. The first slide highlighted that we have about 22 community networks in Africa currently. Given the geographical landscape, I think there is definitely room for more and more. However, is the realization that community networks they are existing right now. There are some that came up and died off, but even the ones that are existing now, it is against so many odds. We have high import taxes, we on telecommunication equipment, we have high cost of license, of spectrum cost, and even just like very few countries now have the regulatory frameworks that accommodate community networks. Access to bandwidth is still a major barrier, and so many of them have to resort to sort of having an online-offline model just to be able to deliver service. So my recommendation is that given that this is a viable and sustainable complementary solution to connecting the unconnected, I think it is key that as we are discussing about ensuring that everyone is connected, we ensure that there's also policy and regulatory frameworks that back up and that are able to support the growth of community networks in Africa. And this takes shape in different ways. It can be, like as discussed previously, issues around spectrum. It can be access to national infrastructure. For example, in Kenya, we have the national fiber optic cable that runs in all the counties. This is a resource that community networks will be able to benefit from. It can also just be access to more funding through the Universal Service Access Fund, and also being that regulators should be able to recognize community networks in their licensing framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine, and thank you for those for that insight into the various models and that exist in terms of the community networks that are operating in the regions, and how they are actually trying to bridge the gaps in their respective communities, which means that there's community ownership and an effort to try and be as responsive as possible to the needs of the community, not just providing the infrastructure to the internet resource, but also complementing that in the various value-added services that they provide. So that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to take a deep dive and just have an experience of to learn from what is happening from the island of Ijwi, the beautiful island of Ijwi in the Eastern DRC. And to take us there will be Miss Shako Armand, who's the Senior Research Coordinator at La de France. And she will talk to us about what's going on at the Pomogenet community network. Ms. Shako, please welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Michuki. Bonjour à toutes et à tous de partout où vous nous écoutez.
Shako,
je vais parler de...
Just one second. My PowerPoint got closed, but I'm reopening it. I had an issue, so I'm reopening it and I'll show your slides.
Okay. So you need me to share myself?
No, I'm going to share it.
No, attendez une minute.
Okay, thank you.
Shako, in the meantime, you can sort of tell us more about yourself and what you're doing at La Défense.
Ok, je suis chargée de recherche au sein de La Différence. L'année passée, j'ai été choisie comme PIA dans le grant de APC. Et raison pour laquelle j'ai commencé à m'intéresser particulièrement dans les réseaux communautaires. Et voilà qu'avec Pamo Janet, je travaille il y a maintenant 2 ans comme PIA. L'expérience que j'ai acquise avec les voyages et les partages des autres réseaux communautaires. Je pense que le slide est prêt, Howard. Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Donc, je disais que je veux parler de Pamo Janet comme l'expérience des réseaux communautaires, particulièrement ici en RDC. Pamo Janet est un réseau communautaire basé au nord de l'île d'Idjwi, dans l'est de la RD Congo. Il existe depuis et l'île d'Idjwi est située dans la province du Sud Kivu avec une population de plus de 300 000 personnes. C'est un environnement difficile en raison de l'isolement, de la faible ouverture mobile, de la pauvreté de la population, d'une mauvaise infrastructure également. Et sur l'île, on ne compte pas plus de 10 voitures. Les gens circulent sur les motos. La connectivité reste un luxe pour la majorité des gens au pays, ici en RDC, notamment les habitants de l'île. La bande passante qu'on utilise est achetée chez nos voisins au Rwanda, et c'est là pour plusieurs raisons. Je vous évite les détails. Pamo Janet a donc été lancé comme une initiative du chef local qu'on appelle le Moami, The King, qui, après avoir reconnu la valeur de la connectivité, a approché La Différence pour travailler avec la communauté, pour construire le réseau. Et le réseau est déployé, entretenu et exploité par l'équipe locale, composée des Congolais, soutenue par une équipe de bénévoles à Londres, au Royaume-Uni. Slide suivant. Merci. Nous travaillons avec la communauté pour construire le mast à Bukavu. Ensuite, il est transporté sur le lac à travers un boat. Il est embarqué jusqu'à l'île d'Idjwi. Tout est fait localement. Comme la photo le démontre là, tout est fait localement pour réduire le coût. Et puis, les habitants de l'île sont très, très impliqués et très utiles pendant la phase de mise en œuvre. Ils creusent, ils assistent, ils transportent le mast, antennes, les panneaux solaires et les batteries, le sable et même le ciment jusqu'aux collines, l'endroit où nous installons le mast. Ils contribuent aussi à l'installation qui est faite par l'équipe de Pamo Janet et de La Différence. Pour la partie technique, le réseau utilise la technologie sans fil, utilisant le bande de fréquence sans licence 5G HZ, reliant Bukavu et Idjwi. Nous explorons également avec les technologies GSM pour proposer des services vocaux et SMS, puisque la majorité des habitants ont accès aux téléphones de base. Ce ne sont pas des smartphones, ce sont des petits téléphones. Et pour cette fin, nous collaborons avec l'organisation Open Cellular, mais le processus est en cours parce que nous n'avons pas encore de licence pour faire ce travail. Cependant, la première phase qui concerne le test et la recherche pour comprendre le besoin des habitants a déjà été faite. C'était un travail satisfaisant. Actuellement, le réseau fournit l'Internet à 8 entreprises locales entre 8h et 16h chaque jour. Ensuite, toute la communauté a la possibilité d'utiliser la connexion gratuitement après 16h jusqu'à tard dans la nuit. Tel que vous pouvez le voir sur cette photo, Pamo Janet, c'est comme un mesh network. Donc, il y a cette liaison entre les lieux où par la connexion à Muganzo, C'est là que nous avons le mast principal. Ensuite, la connexion qui vient de Bukavu arrive à Muganzo, qui descend dans les différents points. Nous avons aussi installé des antennes, notamment la radio, Chefferie, Bougaroula, comme c'est bien vu sur cette photo, avec les différents business locaux. Nous arrivons donc à dispatcher, à distribuer la connexion. Slide suivant. Actuellement, les entreprises locales prennent en charge 60% de coûts mensuels. Nous croyons qu'avec l'intégration du GSM, cela va permettre à notre communauté, à notre réseau communautaire de devenir financièrement viable. Mais le plus important est que les gens se sentent plus informés, connectés et plus proches du reste du monde. Nous croyons avoir trouvé un modèle pour les communautés éloignées qui sont isolées avec Pamojanet, mais nous savons également que nous avons encore beaucoup à faire. Par exemple, des applications pertinentes localement comme l'application Salama. Sur cette photo, ce sont des femmes qui ont reçu des téléphones et qui ont testé cette application de Salama. C'était pour leur sécurité. Nous avions voulu partager avec ces femmes et savoir comment est-ce qu'on peut garantir la sécurité même en étant loin de la maison. Installer cette application où elles ont la possibilité d'envoyer un message au cas où elles sont agressées ou elles ont un problème à leur lieu de travail. Et là, quelqu'un qui est proche peut intervenir ou appeler la police. Et pour parvenir aux objectifs que nous nous sommes assignés, nous sommes sûrs que nous devons collaborer avec d'autres réseaux communautaires, tels que l'a signifié Joséphine Melisa, partager des expériences et apprendre les uns des autres. Nous avons également besoin d'un environnement favorable, comme des politiques et des réglementations favorables aux réseaux communautaires. Cela reste un grand combat, surtout en Afrique, où je pense qu'avec cette réunion, nous allons peut-être trouver des solutions et comment aider les réseaux communautaires à aller de l'avant. Merci, Michuki.
Thank you, Chako. That was very interesting. And I think one of the things which I have drawn from your presentation is the fact that the concept of being a community-owned network means that it will try to be as innovative as possible in providing services that are responsive to the needs of the community. And that's really shown in the service that's been provided to the women in Ijwi Island. Thank you very much. Now, next on, we will like to invite we'd like to invite Ms. Susan Wegoye, who is the Director Legal Affairs at the UCC, or Ugandan Communications Commission. And she is a lawyer by profession and an advocate of the High Court of Uganda. Ms. Wegoye has extensive experience from working in different contexts with a focus on corporate governance, administrative law, legal drafting, and policy development and regulatory matters. She has been instrumental in developing the UCC Act of 2013 and statutory instruments used in the implementation of that licensing framework. And in particular, we are hoping that we'll be able to learn from the Ugandan regulatory approach for creating an enabling environment for communal networks. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you very much. So I'll just go to the presentation to give context to what has been described by the previous panelists. We have looked at communal access and provided for a license category that speaks specifically to that category. In, of course, looking at communal access, we grappled with issues such as the definition of a community, the scope of the license, who is eligible to apply, the license requirements, and of course, we looked at this in the context of the licensing framework and also the Universal Access Service Fund, which has been a gap filler for hard-to-reach areas. Next slide, please. So we look at the broad background against which this has been developed. The Uganda Communications Commission, as many may know, is a converged regulator for communications, which is defined as telecommunications, data communications, radio communications, postal communications, and broadcasting. So within those different subsectors, we have undertaken an exercise of standardizing our licensing, where now we have infrastructure and services as the broad categories. And then of course we have some licenses that combine the two. Then we have these licenses for national coverage and then for regions. And then we have within the regions, the community license category. Now we have implemented this for broadcasting, that's radio and television. We already have a license category that has been issued, for example, for radio to the UNESCO radios that focus on education needs. And then television, we also have that category. Now we are looking at implementing this category for telecommunications. We therefore look at the communal operator as a gap filler for a category of the community that may not necessarily be able to access services on a commercial basis. Next slide, please. So we benchmark the license development against the broadband policy of 2018 that has certain aspirations for the country. And it is the key driver for broadband connectivity for the communications sector. It sets, which is very important, among others, a category of licensing for telecoms, which is the national operator. Now the national operator, among other things, is required to cover 90% of the geographical area of the country over a period of 5 years from the date when the license is issued. Now this license combines services, infrastructure, and value-added services. And then we have also other categories, which would be the infrastructure service provider, and then the services provider, and then of course the community operator. Now, the national operator will cover 90%. Then there will be a 10%, which we think may be the focus for the Universal Service Access Fund. But also within the 10%, it is possible that you will then have the niche for the community licensing, which is geared towards those communities that are in hard-to-reach areas that are either underserved or unserved. Next slide, please. So we provide an overview of the communal operator. As I had said earlier, we defined a community as a group of persons living in the same geographical location, having particular characteristics and interests in common. And looking at that, we also then looked at who may apply. And we found that, for example, this may be granted to a group of persons to collectively deploy, operate shared telecommunication infrastructure to meet their own needs and not-for-profit basis. And then it may also be issued to a not-for-profit organization to provide subsidized telecommunication services to the unserved or the underserved communities. Of course, you can see that the critical thing here is that the service will most probably be subsidized. We are thinking that you may have, say, communities in locations where the operators may not necessarily reach, or you may have communities in refugee camps or We have, for example, floating islands that have communities that are living there. So we're thinking of those categories of people that are in places that are difficult to reach and where they may not necessarily be able to obtain services on a commercial basis. So we also try to address ourselves to then what may be required at the point of application. We would want to see in terms of financing, do you have partnerships? Have you obtained grants? Is there some evidence of sustainability over a period of time? If the services are provided under license, how do you intend to roll out the services? What do the technical plans look like? And things like that. Now, for this license category, we are proposing to issue the license for a period of 5 years, renewable in accordance with the Act. And maybe I could also state at this point that a community license holder would then provide services, because we have divided the country into 4 regions, 4 major license regions, would then provide services within one of the regions at any one time. And then the understanding is that probably to avoid competition with the existing operators, the services should not exceed 75% of the geographical coverage of a license region. And the license fees, of course, are about 10% of the ordinary license fee for a region. So thank you. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Susan. And it's very exciting to see that Uganda is leading the way, at least in East African region, in having recognition of community networks or communal access service providers captured in the new framework. And I'm sure I've seen a couple of comments in the room saying that this is good. And I'm sure there are some people who may have some clarifying questions. So please proceed to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen and post any questions that you may have from that, so that it can be answered during the Q&A session. So finally, I would like to invite our final panelists, who is Mr. Victor Asante, the Senior Manager, Research and Planning from the Ghana Innovation Fund for Electronic Communications, and who's going to talk to us about how they're working to support the development of community networks. Victor, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michuki, and the rest of the panelists. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold there. Yes, as you already said, I work with the Universal Service Fund, and as you all know, I'm in the mandate of Universal Service Funds. The mandate of Universal Service Funds essentially is to sell connectivity. Am I audible, Howard?
Victor, there's a cracking noise on your mic, so maybe I'm not sure why exactly.
Hello, am I clear?
Yeah, it's better now. Yes, thank you.
Yes. As I was saying, the Universal Service Fund is mandated to extend connectivity to areas that we consider as unserved and underserved. And so over the past period, since 2005, when NetHope was established, that's what we have been engaged in, extending connectivity to very remote and rural areas. Next slide. Well, yes, I mean, in Ghana, when we are welcoming our friends, we say, and so please kindly move on to the next slide. Yes, and so over the period, what will be...
Sorry, could you just sort of move the microphone, just make sure it's independent?
I am using the computer audio, rather unfortunately, so that is the challenge.
Okay, yes.
I don't
know. I think so if you don't lean on the table or something, I've seen when you move forward, when it becomes, try that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Michuki. Yes, so over the period, for GIFEC, what we've been doing in respect of connecting Ghana and our story so far is that we've connected over 500 rural communities over the past 3 years, since 2017 till date. About 500,000 beneficiaries within those catchment areas have had access to connectivity. We also do some digital skills in those catchment areas to complement the service that we extend to these areas. The issue is that if people don't have digital skills, how will they be able to utilize the connectivity that we extend to these remote areas? And so digital skills, developing digital skills is one of the key focus areas of the fund. Next slide. Yes, and so you ask the question, why do we need community networks? I mean, if you look at the pictures that shown in the slide, if you look at the gentleman on the left side, he's trying to essentially communicate with a friend or probably a loved one. And this is an area where there is no signal. Probably it's a stray signal that passes through the community. And they have to hang these phones on a particular spot in the community, in the community for them to have access to very basic telephony and of course connectivity. You look at the gentleman next door, see where he's placing the telephone. He's placing the telephone on top of the door. And that is where he can receive signals. And so these are essentially very remote and rural communities. And so the need for community networks is very real and very pressing. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, and so what has been our approach? We have realized that per the existing models that we are using, not every community will fit into the criteria that we design to extend connectivity to rural areas. I mean, if we collaborate with the MNOs, and in doing so, the criteria that we design, there is a threshold of a minimum of about 1,000 people within the community. And if they are unable to get this 1,000 people in the community, what it means is that that community will not have connectivity. And then, of course, the issue of affordability. These are issues that are very remote. These are areas that are very remote, and affordability is a very poor community. So affordability is a very critical issue that the MNOs consider before they extend connectivity in these areas. Another issue that we also found out during the MNOs in our connectivity program is that there are technical challenges that they encounter. I mean, a classic example is that on a yearly basis, I mean, if you select communities for the MNOs to extend connectivity through the simulation metrics, essentially 40% of that communities that we select are dropped. And so what it means is that there are some communities that will not fit the criteria that have been designed, and these communities, per the existing models, will not have connectivity at any point in time. And so we need interventions like the community networks, which are community grown, community owned, to extend to provide connectivity to people within these areas. What has been our approach over the period? Unfortunately, we are yet to have a community network. We don't have one now, and so. But of course, I mean, the fund is exploring other means of extending. The fund is exploring other models. I mean, what we intend doing is that we want a Ghanaian approach. We are not going to copy the models that are being used elsewhere and then transfer them into our system, because we realize that using the telecenter as an example, when the telecenter approach became a tool for extended connectivity, we roll out a lot of telecenters, but the issue is that these telecenters have not become sustainable. And so our idea of established community network is to ensure that we design a fit-for-purpose Ghanaian model that essentially will be sustainable. And so the approach so far has been that we have just established an interim steering committee, which includes the local ISOC team. We've also brought on board the regulator, because the regulator plays a very key role in this enterprise. It is the regulator that will decide on the kind of technologies that can be used. Of course, the USF is available to provide whatever financial resources that we need to assist funding for communities that will decide to have community network. Then, of course, the ministry policy, the policy process is critical. What is the policy that, in respect of community networks in Ghana, is something that we've not done, and so we really don't have the policy in respect of how community networks will be implemented. So, in our approach, as part of the steering committee, we also have the ministry to share perspectives on that. But we are also considering leveraging on the existing community-based organization. In Ghana, we have this group that we call the Ghana Community Radio Network, and over the period, it's a grassroots community-based enterprise, and they've been in existence over the past 30 years. What it means is that there's something that they are doing that is good, that is enabling them to sustain over the years. And so we want to leverage on the strength of the community, the Ghana Community Radio Network, and then extend connectivity to areas that do not have connectivity. Then, of course, Universal Service Fund play a very key role in influencing the policy of the development strategy of local assemblies. What we intend doing is that we've decided that the community networks, they play a very, very critical role in the digital agenda of Ghana. I mean, currently, we have a very aggressive digital agenda program where all public service entities are actually encouraged to go digital. And so to ensure that nobody is left out, we are encouraging the local assemblies to adopt the community networks as part of their developmental strategy, to ensure that when these interventions are started, they will give the necessary support to ensure that they are very sustainable. Yeah. The next slide. Yes, so there's a question that I asked. Do you have an option to digital connectivity? I mean, COVID has really taught us that there's no way we can do without connectivity. I mean, in the past, economies were largely driven by oil resources, and then, of course, other natural resources. But with what COVID has taught us, with what COVID has taught us, now the way forward is to ensure that we go on the digital path. And so we don't really have any option to ensure that every area within the country is digitally connected. And that is what the Universal Service Fund is set out to do in the years coming. Next slide. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much for that brief on what GIFEC is doing, and I'm pretty sure there will be some questions that will be coming to you. And with that, we've sort of come to the end of the panel, the interventions from the panelists, and we'll like to go into the Q&A session. So we already have a couple of questions that have come up, and so I would like to take the opportunity to just queue up the questions for the panelists to answer. We've slightly run out of time, so hopefully I'll just like to request the panelists if you can be brief to the point when answering the questions. So the first question we have is, all these community or local networks, or rather, let me rephrase that, all these community and local networks need access to backhaul to the capital cities and global networks. In which countries are these accessible at convenient nearby locations and at affordable rates? Anyone to take that? Josephine, maybe?
Yes, I'd like to take that. So I'll react. I'm not sure about affordability, but one of the things that I shared in the presentation has been the collaboration with existing operators. So for example, in the case of Kenya, where we have, we are able to connect to the Kenneth network that is very extensive and goes throughout the country. And because the two networks, the community networks in Kenya have an educational component, so they are able to leverage on this. But I wouldn't say that up to now, we as community networks, we have had access to infrastructure that is very near us and at an affordable rate, but we would like to.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to respond to this? Susan, if you wanted to, you're still on mute, maybe just, okay.
Speaking to the licensing model that we're looking at, it's envisaged that the community networks will actually be connected to the main networks for the other operators that will be licensed.
Okay, thank you. Chaco, how are you able to get access to the internet? And how affordable is it?
Comme je l'ai dit, nous avons l'Internet via notre pays voisin, le Rwanda. Et, mais pour l'instant aussi, nous collaborons avec une organisation locale dans la distribution de l'Internet qui s'appelle Ajiwa.
And through some of its antennas, we have the possibility to connect in Ajua and Bukavu and send it into the island Ajui.
Okay, thank you. So I think to that question, what is clear is that it's still a challenge and there is no easy way to get, because of where they are getting access to, where there's affordable access to national connectivity to the rest of the country or internationally, it's quite difficult. And investments will need to be made to resolve this. And also collaboration and partnerships will also need to be made with operators so that they can get the bandwidth and the capacity at a lower cost. So that is an ongoing challenge that most community networks are facing. And thoughts and innovative approaches will need to be made to bridge that, or at least address that, so that it can lower the costs that of the bandwidth that is being delivered to the community. The next question I have is from our good friend Matogoro, and he asks, what could be the best approach to influence policy changes? And I think this, if I could paraphrase, I see a number of countries in Africa that have, like Kenya, for instance, and others who already have a statement to support the existence of, to support community networks as an approach. Moctar has talked about the SDC declarations, but we are yet to see countries really taking this on at the national level or transposing this at the national level to become a national policy or integrated as a regulatory framework. So what is the best approach? Susan, you seem to have solve this? It's done in Uganda. What can other countries learn, and what strategies can they use to get to where you are?
Thank you. What we've done is to, first of all, ride on existing policies and laws. We have within the Communications Act, the Universal Service Access Fund, which then has statutory instruments that defines unserved and underserved areas. And we pick from those then to define the areas where the community licenses will then be issued, looking at communities that are unserved and underserved. And we've then also picked from the national broadband policies and the regulations to define the community operator, because we think that that is critical, and then taken that down into the licensing framework. So we're basically using our existing laws, policies, and then supporting that with statutory instruments, and then the licensing framework that has been put in place to give effect to what we want to see in terms of the communal operator.
Thank you. Jason, maybe I could direct this to you. What have you seen working in South Africa?
Sorry, can you hear me? I think, like it's a difficult question, but I think sometimes policy is not necessarily that hard to influence because it's made open for consultation and you can get into that door. I think it's where you've got existing legislation and regulations that don't provide the enabling environment for these kind of networks. I think that's more the challenge, not necessarily policy change, but it's enacting these things when you don't have the right legislation or regulation in place.
Okay. So I have another question from the audience, and this is coming from Madame Tabiseng from Lesotho, and she would like to know what solutions have been tried for making affordable devices available to the communities where the networks have been deployed. Josephine, do you have some general views on how they've been able to do that?
I would say for most community networks has been, it's not that the devices have been made affordable, but mostly through donations. So I would give an example of CYD, Center for Youth Development, which is in Malawi. And they have partnered with a UK-based organization and received donations for computers. And so through this, they are able to give the computers to schools. But with regards to like access to mobile phones or other internet-enabled devices that can be able to support communities, there's still a challenge. And that is why we can see, for example, in the case of Pamojanet, just having Wi-Fi for them is not enough. They have to now look into other IMT bands, such as 2G, so that they can be able to provide access to mobile, to voice and SMS, because these are the devices that most of the community members have.
Thank you, Josephine. Chako, do you have any other input you'd like to share?
I think regarding the regulatory framework or policy, it's an ongoing battle, specifically in DRC. To have conducive policies, to have good policies, it is a real challenge. So we are still fighting within OPC because everything is centralized in Kinshasa. So to have a document, you have to reach the capital, and it's a long process, tedious process, but we are still working on that.
Okay, thank you. So I have some specific ones to Susan, and so and there are sort of two of them. So let me just put them together. It seems that the CNs are relegated to the 10% most difficult to reach part, which is also difficult from a competition market point of view for larger operators, meaning that it doesn't make the business case. And the second, building on that, is what is the value in terms of the amount value for community license network in a communal license network in Uganda?
Thank you. I'll start with the second one, the value. What I'll take it, but what does it cost one to obtain a communal license in Uganda? So there is a one-time license application fee of $500, and then an annual license fee of $1,000. That is about 10% of the license fees for the cheapest region in terms of licensing. And of course, that would then probably help us to answer the second question, which is to say that we have looked at the communal license as a gap filler. Indeed, for those hard to reach areas, it's not meant to be a commercial license. So we think that it will be an initiative that will require grants and partnerships. And of course, the commission itself, that's why I said at the beginning that also the Universal Service Access Fund of the commission will be looking at the 10% area that is not commercially viable, and that would be what would be considered the unserved and the underserved. So there is definitely going to be some intervention by the fund. At this point, we don't yet have it cast in stone, but there will be some intervention by the fund. And we're also hoping that there will be other support in form of grants and partnerships. So that space is not a commercial space. It's going to provide subsidized services. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Susan. I think the question probably is also looking at how those subsidies can be increased, so that from a licensing point of view, when it has been seen previously that licenses do tend to create a barrier as well. And so the flexibility on that would certainly be of value and benefit to, as you've rightfully observed, community networks are non-profit organizations. So any flexibility on that would certainly be of value to then community networks. And but thank you for that feedback. It's quite useful. Now to the next question, and I think this will be the last one. How do CNs plan to operate in a manner that creates an enabling environment for other upcoming CNs to be stable and leverage on existing CNs? So I think this is something that is probably directed to Josephine. What's your thought on that?
I would say documenting of best practices so that those coming can be able to learn from existing mistakes that have happened and also the wins that other community networks have had. And there's also a very vibrant community of community networks that meet together every year, except for 2020 because of COVID-19. And there's a WhatsApp group that we are able to share with. So I think for me, this is creating a movement in Africa where slowly but constantly we are beginning to share experiences, knowledge, and expertise from one community to another, building onto what others have already done. So for example, if you were to start a community network right now in Uganda, there's Bosco Uganda to be able to learn from. South Africa is a very good case of how these collaborations are working now that with the two-tier model, with the NPC as well as the cooperatives now coming in to get that support that goes beyond seeding to actual capacity building, as well as how to be able to navigate the policy and regulatory environment.
Thank you, Josephine. So with that, I would like to close the Q&A session and come back to closing remarks from each panelist. I'll give you 30 seconds to just give your views on, or just a statement on how can we continue to support the creation of community networks. So I'll start with you, Jason.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
How can we continue to support the creation or establishment of community networks?
Yeah, so I suppose that's the million-dollar question. I think, I think it's a case of everyone and all stakeholders pulling in the same direction. So you need policymakers, legislators, regulators all believing in the value of it. And you probably also need private operators to also believe that there's value in this, and it can be done in such a way that it's not necessarily a cost or a threat to their own businesses. And then just the use of good examples to show the benefits, to show how people benefit from these networks, to show what kind of things can come out of it, to also help pull all those stakeholders together. So it's just a case of every facet and every barrier we've seen pulling together in the same direction to see the value of it, and then you'll get progress.
Thank you. Josephine, 30 seconds.
Yeah, in addition to what Jason had said, for me, it's a mind shift from viewing communities as passive users to actually people that can be able to innovate and to build these networks. I remember one time Michuki gave us a good example. Whenever you want an electrician in the village, you do not call someone from the city. There's actually someone who is self-taught. So communities can be able to build this network that has created environments for them to be able to do this.
Thank you. Chaco?
I think community networks, when we talk about community networks, we talk about communities. We have to work with the communities. We want to know the needs. We have to know the needs of the communities. Yes, you might install a community network, but if you do not belong to that community, then it might be a problem for you to be accepted.
Thank you. Susan.
Thank you. I think my take home from this panel discussion is that we need policies, definitely frameworks. We need subsidies, and of course, we need to engage the communities so that everything is pulling together in the same direction.
Thank you. And Victor, finally. Victor.
Yes, for us at the Investor Service Fund, per our access gap analysis, we realized that there is no way we could cover the whole country without bringing on board the community networks. And so, as the fund mandated to support the establishment of such enterprises, we are trying to, we might be engaging the relevant stakeholders to ensure that we may be able to establish a community network in all unconnected areas.
Thank you very much. So with that, we like to bring this fifth session of the African Internet Resilience Series, webinar series, to a close. I'd like to thank all the panelists for really their important contributions in helping us better understand the issue of complementary access networks, what they are, why we need them, what they are, and how policy can also play an enabling role. And as we go forward for the next steps, we will be doing, with the help of NetHope, who is one of our partners, we'll be producing a summary and a policy overview paper that is informed by this webinar or this series, and it will basically help us outline the implementation details, and we hope that that paper will be published in August, so please look out for that. I'll also like to take this opportunity, in addition to thanking the speakers, to also thank the partners who've worked with us to enable or to facilitate this webinar series. Specifically, I would like to start with APC, who organized this particular session, which was under the LockNet initiative, which is trying to answer the questions whether communities can, or the unconnected, if they can connect themselves. And we also have the African Union Commission. Moctar was here, thank you very much. We have the African Telecommunications Union, Mozilla, NetHope, and where I work, the Internet Society. So we are certainly looking forward to have you at the next event. We do have the dates for the next event, I believe. If that
yes, that's August 13th.
August 13th. So the next in the series, this next session in the series will be on August 13th. So please look out for that announcement. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for making time. We had over 100 people connecting on the Zoom. So thank you very much. And thank you also for the team in the background, the interpreters, the logistics team from ISOC and the comms team from the various organizations for making this a really interesting engagement. And we look forward to carrying on the engagement online in the various social media channels that we've shared using the hashtag Africa Internet Resilience. Thank you very much, and do have a good afternoon, day, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.